Let's go on the third and last one, and which I will combine with other objections under it just to make sure that I cover as much as I can. There will probably be others I've missed, but these were the major ones that I heard. And so it's very, very important. I'm going to share my screen of ideas I came up with before I get back to discussing the counter objectives, uh, counter objections. Again, as I stated from the beginning, my counter objections are not saying that the people who have these ideas are wrong, but rather that the reasons why I have the position I have, which I believe that divorce is a human right and that it should not be taken away. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. That's one of the things, on the notes I wrote for the third objection, and we're going to go from there. So it's this idea that, forgive my notes if I made mistakes. These are quick notes I wrote in relation to this, but you get the gist. The idea is that the rate of domestic violence in countries that allow no fault divorce and those that do not are the same. Domestic. It's literally actually true. Like not only domestic violence, but abuse. Like countries where you'd think that countries where the marriages are forced and imposed would have a much higher rate than, countries where the marriages. But actually, I found out, I was reading about the Philippines, because the Philippines still has uh, does not allow divorce. And there was a paper I came across which was actually pretty well researched. I thought, no, this guy's just a Catholic who's trying to defend this. It was pretty well researched, and it does show that if you look at the stats, there is not much difference between domestic violence. The problem of domestic violence is similar whether you allow divorce or you don't. In other words, our idea from our side, which says, hey, if you allow divorce, if you allow people to divorce, then the domestic violence will go down, and deep down, that's not what happens. It's the same. The rate is quite similar. It doesn't change. Um, I would like to look at any papers that would counter that, but that's what I read about it, and it's very, very interesting. Okay, so that's why I said basically the argument people are forced to stay in marriages that will lead to more abuse is flawed. So this idea that it used to be that the argument that was made by feminists, people um, from other positions who supported divorce was this idea that when you marry, when when you're forced to stay in a relationship, it becomes more abusive because you can't get out of it. If you can easily get out of it, it will lessen the abuse rate because people can get out of a relationship. But like the story I told you about the gentleman who was killed by his wife in previously, this is not the case. He basically he could have gotten out, but he chose to stay. In other words, sometimes even when people can easily get out, they choose those, the domestic violence rate is just not going to change based on, the fact that we allow divorce. In fact, many people who are abused sometimes go back to their abusers for reasons of domestic violence and abuses. Domestic violence is really complicated, and I'm not an expert. And so that's what it really shows that those are the numbers. Now, more marriages lead to a stable society. So the idea is that if we have more marriages, more two-family homes, it leads to a stable society. It's a much more stable society than people living separately. And this is true because if you have two people living together, sharing resources and sharing expenses, they actually have more. Okay. There are so many, when you have divided responsibilities, you can do more with your time. You can do more. If you have children, you can take care of your children in a much more easy way. Easy way. I discussed that previously, and this is a fact. It's very difficult. We know this. It's very difficult for example, for mostly single moms or single parents, single fathers too, to take care of their children. It's really hard. You go to work. Who's going to take care? Who's going to babysit the kids? How are you going to divide responsibility? How about expenses? How does it work? All these things can be factored in. So more stability. So everything should be done to keep people together. Because sometimes people don't know what they want. Okay. There are times when people will face marriage challenges, and the government should, by all means, discourage people rushing to divorce. And this is why you should, having this idea of having divorce as a human right, and people can just say, oh, I want a divorce, is iffy. That's what they are saying to people like themselves. They're saying, look, Chindi, you you have no idea because you don't have kids, which is a good argument. You don't have kids, okay? So you've no idea what it means to be a single mom and live separately. Although there are single moms who've also told me and say, hey, I made this decision. It was the greatest decision I ever made. I broke up with my boyfriend or slash husband, and it's the greatest decision I ever made. That's a separate topic. I'll get to that later when I counter this objection. But the idea is that we should try by all means to keep people together. Yes, it's difficult sometimes. If somebody's cheating or there's abuse, that's going to be practically impossible. One thing that has to be said is that almost everybody I met who is quite conservative on this idea, including people who are religiously conservative, understood that in situations of domestic violence and or adultery, they understood that people should be able to, that people should not be forced to stay in those situations. And I'm talking about people who are religiously very conservative. And if I ask them and say, what about, they said, look, in that situation, the person should definitely leave. Okay. So, because I think sometimes we strawman the people who are opposed to divorce, and we say, oh, they're trying to keep, in most cases, women in this relationship that they can never get out, which leads to all sorts of abuses, right? But that's not the case. Everyone I met told me, look, if there's physical abuse or if there's adultery, people should leave. In fact, I'll be the first. Someone was even told me I'll be the first person. If that happened to my sister, I'll be the first person to go and pick up my sister. So most of them make us. I'm not. You must be careful not to strawman our opponents. So probably there might be that one weird person who says no matter what, staying. I've never heard that, and then I don't think they would have the courage to say it publicly, to be honest. But the idea is that people should do everything they can to stay in a marriage, that people should work out things, that society, we need to toughen up, and that there will be rocky situations in relationships. Relationships are tough. Living with people is tough, and you're going to face challenges, but you must deal with those challenges. You must find ways to deal with each other. Maybe take a little bit of a break. You sleep in separate rooms to give each other space or something, but just don't break up a bit. So that's what this argument was, and it was a great argument, and I thought that was really, really good. And I thought, wow, these are great objections. Now, my counter objection always has been that I have a lot of friends who are single mothers who will tell me that they are happy that they left their husband. Okay. Yeah, and I'm saying this as women because pretty much for me, most of them are women, like exclusively women. And they'll say, Chindi, this was the greatest decision I have made. I left and I was able to raise my child. And in fact, they were not bitter at all. They would say the father is welcome to visit the um, daughter. I have another friend of mine um, whose daughter is now an adult. And the father came to visit, and the daughter didn't even want to see the father, but she was like, encouraging the daughter, hey, go see your father. That's your father. Go meet him, meet together, and I'll go pick him up. So it's not about, I think there are other ways to make sure that the effects of divorce are not severe. And what we could do is to probably encourage people to co-parent. Co-parenting is a solution across the board. But I don't think we should force people to live together if they don't want to. And they shouldn't have to give a reason for it. Because if we have to do that, it will create a lot of problems. And then it becomes whoever can speak the smartness. So sometimes people can't express themselves really well. I do remember one time I think it was something to do with my job. I got into a bit of trouble at my work. And the lady, my boss was asking me what happened. And I just didn't know how to answer because I just didn't have the courage to answer the question as to what happened and what mistakes I made. And I think fortunately she realized that I was not the kind of person who was very who's kind of aggressive or confrontational. And so she realized that. And so she changed the approach and it ended up working out. But my point is that some of us are just not, we don't like, we try to avoid conflict. And so the last thing we want is to have to go to court and give a reason as to why we're divorcing. Sometimes we don't want to go through that. We just want to say, I want a divorce, I want out, and that's it. And we can argue about the property, but we don't want to bring up other things in addition to the finances. Remember what I said in the first episode. The, divorce is a legal separation. Marriage by state is a legal union. It's about finances. It's not about, there are a lot of other people who do it for religious reasons and, oh, we do it for religion and all that. And that's a separate issue. For example, you can legally divorce and the Catholic Church may not recognize your divorce. I'll discuss, that separately. I'm not Catholic myself, but I've heard from Catholic just because you divorce doesn't mean the Catholic is going to recognize your divorce. It's it's complex, especially if you're married within the church. But that's a separate conversation on that. The fact is that forcing people to stay together, for the state to do that would actually be a violation of somebody's human right. The idea of consent is very important in every relationship, including a marriage. You cannot, and we must not force people to have to stay together. So the objections are well founded. And in a way, we shouldn't look at the objections as, oh, these are bad objections. How dare somebody thinks that people should stay together? We need to understand that a divorce has a problem, may have a problem on society. So the three objections that are being made are made on utilitarian grounds, mostly. The idea that society suffers as a whole if the divorce rate is high. So we give individuals freedom to divorce and society suffers. That's a major objection to my position. And we have to face up to that for those who believe in human rights. But if you go to the Human Rights Declaration and read it, and you can read the 30 declarations of human rights. I'll actually put a link for the 30 um, uh, declarations of human rights. So you can read it for yourself. And I'll go through them at some point during my discussion. It's very important that we understand that one of the essence of those human rights declaration is individualism. This idea that that we need consent from individuals. We can't just go and take away their freedoms. Okay. You have to have good reason for doing that. And so if somebody wants to get out of a marriage, the onus is not on that individual who is getting out of a marriage to explain to the state why they're getting out of a marriage. The onus is on the state to explain to the individual why they're stopping from not getting married. And I don't think there's a good reason to stop somebody from divorcing, in other words. So if the state is saying you must not get divorced, the state needs to explain why. And they need to provide very concrete, good grounds on human rights, including on human rights. And why are they taking away your consent? What did you do wrong? You didn't commit a crime. So why are they taking away your consent? So that is why ultimately despite the objections, which are great, I still stand on the position of divorce as a human right. Thank you for listening to me. This has been a long conversation, and I hope you enjoyed it. And my next topic, and my third topic I'll be discussing, will be about another topic which has to do with consent, but it's about a topic that was happening in Nigeria involved a senator called Ike Kremadu and his wife. I can't wait to recall that because I did a lot of good research on that. So good luck to everybody and enjoy yourselves. Bye.